I'm sorry. He just texted me. It was okay.
Is there a link?
Yes. Sorry about that. I should have made
No worries.
all good.
So if you can get it to John, please. So good. I'm not gonna be able to send him the link.
Okay, I
I was just saying, as long as you're bad, then I'm gonna need somebody who's way better at this than I am. I'm like, yep, there's no link right here, I'm linkless.
Okay, please hold for one moment.
Like, there's an agenda.
It's right there.
I could not be more stoked about Earth Day.
Oh, really?
These holidays that don't involve my family are the greatest gifts. It's like a pure mental health day. You can get it if you want.
It's a.
Go back up on this.
Earth Day for solid waste. It came out today in the world. It was on the newsletter, went out already. Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to Property Committee of April 20th, 2026. We have a new charge from the mayor, and we have the committee members here and staff that Andrew has assembled to teach us. Want to just start with the charge and teach us what we need to know?
Sure thing, if we can get the presentation shared. So today we're gonna go through 4 things. We'll review the mayor's charge to the committee. The attorney's office is gonna be kind enough to talk to us a little bit about state law, what it says about public property disposition on the next slide. James is gonna take us through some of our property maintenance trends and some comments about unique aspects of these properties. And then that should prompt some discussion for the committee about next steps. So if we will, we'll move on to the next slide. On the left here, you can see the mayor's charge as it was written out. Fundamentally, there's some key points here. So talks about transferring properties utilized by a sole nonprofit, i.e. a single facility user. We do have facilities that are more kind of condominium or shared use in style, and so we'll review those briefly today, but won't take a deep dive. Intends to transfer them to the nonprofit that's operating the facility. So not only is there a target facility, but an ideal end user. The second paragraph gets into historic protection where it might be appropriate. And then the third paragraph talks about mechanisms for ACC Gov to recover or recoup its ownership should we be able to transfer them and then those parties no longer want them. And so going to the next slide, on the left here, you'll see all of the properties that we currently rent to nonprofits. So we have other properties that we rent to quasi-government and state agencies. So for example, we rent space to the public defender's office and we have a $1 lease with the library, things like that. But those are not nonprofits, so they're already automatically out. Here I've listed both the facility and the tenant and then whether or not it meets the mayor's charge. So in particular, I would point out that the Miriam Moore Center, where there is the shared tenancy amongst EADC, Athens Tutorial, and the health department, is all within a single building, and that building is not set up for actual legal condo style ownership. And so I would suggest to you that that's outside the mayor's charge. Last thing to point out is that Taylor Grady House and the Athens Community Theater, actually, while they have different mailing addresses, they share a common parcel. And so in order to meet the mayor's charge, you would actually have to subdivide them into 2 separate parcels, which on a preliminary review, I feel like is probably viable. And that's something we could take a deeper dive into as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to ask the attorney's office to walk us through a little bit about public property disposition.
Okay, and then this is just a very high level discussion. I certainly haven't included everything in here. And then John's joined us on WebEx, so I'll invite him to jump in whenever he feels is necessary. So in general terms, property disposition is governed by your own ordinance, section 7502, and then most notably through the state law. So 3693 is the really relevant code. Right, next slide. So your own ordinance, and again, I'll just summarize. Basically, it empowers you to exercise your authorities to dispose of property through the state law, which just kind of gives you the local authority to do so.
We locally need to use the state's law.
Yes,
Just,
and it makes reference to that, right? So you're under section A, you're authorized to sell any real or personal property essentially pursuant to the state laws. And then you're empowered to authorize some additional transactions. So the transfer, this is under subparagraph B, the transfer or sale to another government entity or a property swap, okay? And those things are actually contemplated in the state law as well, but just explicitly within the ordinances, you're offered this, you're empowered to do these things. So property, when I say property swap, I mean an exchange of property for equal value.
which we just did in the core property, doing the math for the
Correct.
value
Correct.
of that, and that is public and private,
And that's fine. A property swap is fine with a private entity.
as well as other governmental entities, which we've done with the school district.
Yes, ma'am. And unlike a private entity, like government property can be given to a school system or another. It can be, right? It doesn't have to be an equal value exchange
Okay.
with another government entity, including school systems, school districts. Yes.
So if we're doing it, giving them to a nonprofit, that keeps them off the tax digest?
We can't get,
Well, we'll get to that. We can't give it to a nonprofit,
Okay.
but you are correct that nonprofits typically are not going to pay property taxes, with some exceptions. If they generate revenue, you guys, I don't know if you remember the Nucci Space case, but there are some exceptions there.
so
But
that,
as a general rule, that is correct.
yeah, so we'll get into how those play out, but this is the category for government to government swapping. And we'll get to what it looks like, government to other.
Yeah, in fact, we'll go ahead and advance to the next slide. That's really largely governed by state law.
Okay.
So, I mean, all sales have to be made to the highest responsible bidder, either by sealed bids or an auction process. So when a government wants to unload some property, it has to go to bid or auction, unless it's another government entity. So,
Does the auction have to be on the courthouse steps? Always heard about that.
Sean, do you know, does it have to be like a auction to the steps at the courthouse? Probably not.
Doesn't have to be on the house, yes, but that is, for instance, tax sales, things like that.
One sec.
Hold on, Gerbil, hold on, I'm gonna.
Let's try again. Try again, John.
Oh, could y'all not hear? I'm sorry. My recollection is right off for the government selling its own property through the process. It doesn't have, that is, for instance, that's what the commissioner does.
John, might be time for a new microphone, buddy.
Oh, I hear you.
Well, John, I'm just gonna take over, and if I say something, just text me.
Oh, wait, can y'all hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so, I'll try to say it again. To my recollection, if a government is selling its own property, that doesn't have to necessarily be an auction on the courthouse steps. I think you could do it through another type of auction. To my recollection, I don't have the exact code section in front of me, but the auction on the courthouse steps is usually sheriff sales, tax commissioner sales, things like that.
Thank you.
And so that bidding process, that auction process can be conducted in-house, or counties are able to retain the services of a real estate broker to usher it through that process. The process of actually getting the broker in the first place is subject to, you have to issue a request for proposals to employ the broker. So there is a There is a step there. That's a competitive process to become the broker.
The RFP,
That's correct.
and then in the real estate, let's say we went through that process, we had a real estate company that was whatever, however that process is. Then they execute the auction,
They can,
because
or they
back to
could
the
appoint somebody to do so.
Probably do highest bid.
or do the sealed envelope highest bidder thing, but it's, as I've been saying for years, why isn't there a for sale sign on the property on Broad Street? And this is why, right, Andrew?
Yes, and I have good news, regardless of what the property committee decides to do with this charge. We will be doing an RFP for a commercial broker, not only because we know that we've got to do something with cooperative extension that's languished since y'all authorized its sale. But also we anticipate that we're gonna need to actually rent some commercial spaces as we look at things where the judicial center is gonna go. And so if we're gonna go through the effort of getting a real estate broker to help us with these things, we're gonna try to structure that solicitation and the resulting contract where it can be a continued relationship, annual but renewable.
Right, and not only commercial. So you're saying that process is gonna go underway for something else,
Correct.
but it would not limit the use of certain
That's right.
property that could come out of here.
We're looking for a service. It just so happens that we know the service is gonna have a few key steps, but being able to have a resource that we can call on to help us, even like when we're negotiating our own lease with the Smokers Den, you know, it might be helpful to have an agent look at it and share their thoughts. But mostly for how we're gonna be securing space and then selling any off any old buildings.
That sounds very smart. Melissa, did you?
Yeah, I have a question about the scenario of, the government maintaining ownership of the land and having another entity own and maintain the structure with some conditions.
Is that coming up in a slide?
It's like the land trust does.
Brown leaves.
Would
Yeah.
the building itself be considered real property?
The building is real property.
So would that be subject to the same, like, highest bidder?
If walk me through it again. So we hold the land, but we actually sell the structure
Yeah, much
itself.
like the land trust, sells homes, yeah. And that keeps the value of the property down and makes it less, less attractive to someone who might want to redevelop it.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Yes, then, and John, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think even just the sale of that structure itself would be subject to the bid or auction process.
Yeah, so I think that's probably right, Courtney. And, you know, there may be, that may, depending on the type of transaction we're talking about too, that may be something where we'd want to consider a ground lease as well.
Yeah.
But, you know, it just kind of depends on the situation and the scenario and the type of property that we're discussing.
But and I think that's what Commissioner Link is speaking to is.
So
the
if we were to put these property like on the market for sale, we could put a bunch of conditions around them.
So, yeah, so actually that was the next point I was going to here. So go back to that was a very sensible thing for you to do advance. I'm sorry. And so when a property under 3693 is put out for either sealed bids or auction, there's a whole noticing requirement, of course. And part of the notice calls for that the sealed bids or the announcement for the auction shall include, quote, conditions of the proposed sale. So I think John can speak to this, but I think red broad, that obviously is things like in our mind, right? Price and closing date and terms of occupancy and things like that. But I think read broadly, that could include some additional conditions that you're probably speaking to. John, did you want to speak to that a bit?
No, I
Because I know
think
you
that
have
was
some
I think that was a good description, Courtney. I mean, we would obviously have to be careful with that phrasing, but I think what Courtney says is a correct statement.
So one example that I think we discussed prior to this meeting, the mayor's charge speaks about the need for historic preservation and even talks about things like a facade easement. So if it was our intent as the unified government to sell a historic building, but before selling it, we were gonna place a facade easement, well, that hinders the value of the property, the redevelopment potential. And so that would be the kind of condition we would want to disclose in our sales solicitation so that the folks bidding on it know kind of what it is. Another that you might want to consider would be zoning. Each one of these properties predominantly is going to be zone G. Well, we wouldn't sell it zone G. And so when the commission approved his cooperative extension for sale, old cooperative extension, we did actually rezone it. So the person who bids on it will know what its kind of highest and best use under that legal framework is allowed.
So could we put a condition that is related to the use in that if the buyer must be a nonprofit that maintains some public accessibility to the property and some community benefit?
Yeah, I think that we would, so I think we would have to, I think the conditions are a great way to sort of achieve some policy objectives like you're speaking to. I think we have to be really careful in scrutinizing each one. So for example, I think there are use conditions that would be appropriate. I'm not sure that a proper condition would be defining the type of entity that could purchase it. So a nonprofit versus a tax-paying, organization. That one we really have to think about. And in addition, the conditions can't be such that you really box it into where there's only one potential person who could possibly be the highest responsible bidder.
So what's the goal of this? Is it for us not to have to pay for the maintenance on these buildings?
James is gonna cover that, so
Okay.
we'll know what numbers are involved.
Yeah, I mean, it's
that are
hard.
helping us at this point.
That's, when we know that, then we know how to make these.
Right. I'm giving you the legal background. and I'll let James fill in the policy.
And on that legal part, Sydney, can you go back to the one that said sell and disposition of property title? So to piggyback on what Melissa was saying, if some of the conditions for selling are no other public purpose, this is one of the reasons why we're getting rid of it, does that keep us from having a condition, like she mentioned, that says the people who buy it still have a public function or objective to what they do?
I see what you're
You
saying.
see what I'm saying? It seems like we're already saying that we don't have a public purpose for it, so it can, and this would probably be another meeting, if we could look into what sort of conditions are okay and which would interfere with us not needing it. And
Yeah.
Yeah, I think public there, for example, could be read as for the owned by government,
Okay.
right? But I think that having sort of a public policy, interest or being an interest that is public.
versus
Yeah,
a
being-
private club or a membership club,
Well,
or is that?
Yeah, there's certainly a public interest in historic preservation, but the local government is not the entity preserving the random.
yeah.
Like,
I think matters of public interest are separate
Yeah,
from
okay.
this being owned for public purposes,
Yeah.
for the purposes of having a tax office or.
like publicly funded public
Okay, yes.
services.
Okay, thank you.
And then I promise I won't wear you guys out too much on the statute. I'll just give you two more slides to think about. Okay, don't read that. I'm gonna give you the highlights here.
And we also have it to go.
Yeah, you sure do. That's why I put it in, because I knew you'd have it in printed form, but I
Yeah.
can tell you just sort of the high level exceptions to the general rule that, the property must go to the highest responsible bidder, either by sealed bid or auction. So there's some exceptions, of course, for easements and tax redemptions, things like that. Also, you'll see a reference to a lease purchase transaction. That's where the lease purchase, John can explain the history to that if you're interested in it, but that's basically where the government would be the ultimate purchaser of that property. And we would just need, John, do you want to go ahead and speak to the history of that?
Sure. Yeah, to my understanding, I think that was added in particularly for smaller counties. And by the way, the code section that Courtney's reading from, this is for counties. And that's because the charter, section 7-502 that Courtney pointed out to you earlier, That's one of the exceptions where we're treated as a county rather than a city under our charter. So for property disposition, we have to do it as a county would. But my understanding is that that lease purchase transaction, that's, for instance, if a county wanted to purchase a building and they needed to do a lease purchase, and ACCG will do that for small, I mean, I guess any county, but I think they used to do that primarily for smaller counties. So that was built in the law to allow those types of transactions.
Okay, so that's, if we were purchasing, which
That's
we're
right.
very clear, we do not.
This is a disposition committee, not.
It's a disposition committee.
Yeah.
And so
It-
so to flip that, John, let's say we have an interested tenant who can't afford to purchase. Would we be able to arrange financing opportunity to the highest bidder?
I would be concerned about that because of the constitutional provision against pledging credit of the state, which basically prohibits, it says the state, but it also prohibits cities and counties from pledging their credit. In other words, lending credit to other people.
Gotcha. So we can have our land bank authority do loans. We can do, there are entities within the government that does loans like our affordable housing.
Certainly the affordable housing trust fund that you all
Yeah.
discussed last week would absolutely be a loan, but able to do loans. And that's why you're having to look outside the government for that service and
There you
for the provision of that fund.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, thanks for.
Sure. B and C really deal with properties that had these options prior to the late 50s and the early 60s. I'm not sure we're talking about any of those. So, I mean, we can if we ever get to that. But then sub D is contemplates property swap, just as similar to what's contemplated in your local ordinance. Okay, so that's the exception. And then finally, on the last slide, like I referenced earlier, property may be sold, granted, conveyed, transferred, without having to swap for equal value with a public educational institution for use as a public school or other educational purposes. And you don't have to go through the advertising, bidding, auction process. So that's the super high level law on, I mean, there's plenty more to it, but that's, I think, for our purposes, sort of the groundwork.
Well, here's the fun part. How much this stuff is costing us. All right. So first up, we have the Athens Community Theater located at 115 Brady Avenue. At this time, we have no major life cycle replacement. Looking ahead though, the life cycle plan identifies several upcoming maintenance items, including painting, HVAC work as well. Painting, we estimated about $6,100. When it comes to HVAC work, we anticipate going at between 2027 and 2029, anywhere from $12,000 to $25,000 for HVAC work on this facility. This was 2 days ago when we looked at these numbers. Those numbers might be completely different now. From an operational standpoint, the largest annual cost driver for this facility is typically the HVAC maintenance and mechanical upkeep. Other than that, we tend to kind of keep this one fairly low. When it comes to that, you also notice that we have our landscape maintenance up there as well, cost up there as well. We like to keep it pretty.
And this is the one that shares the site with Taylor Grady, and so it's a pretty high level of landscaping across the entire site.
To contrast it again, Andrew, with your earlier chart of, since this is 2 addresses and splitting it is feasible versus 1 roof and 3 tenants.
Correct. That's
Just, okay, Kinley. Okay, thank you.
The next facility is going to be the Church Waddell Brumby House, which is currently operates as the Athens Welcome Center, which is located at 280 East Doherty Street. There have been no major life cycle replacements at this facility in recent years, but looking ahead, we have identified several things to keep up with. For FY 27, we're looking at $2,900 in HVAC, in painting, I'm sorry. HVAC equipment replacement between 2028 and 2030, Estimated cost between $16,000 and $20,000 there. This structure is believed to be the oldest original house in Athens, which adds historical significance, but also increased maintenance cost. So also, in addition to this, SPLOST 2020 program included approximately $825,000 dedicated to accessibility improvements, which are expected to begin soon, by contract. The Convention and Visitor Bureau allocates the hotel motel tax funds to help support this operations as the welcome center. So it may not seem like a lot upfront, but we are putting a lot of funds into this with the hotel motel taxes and the SPLOST stuff to kind of keep this building up and running. That's what.
Through, CBB, or Visit Athens.
Yes.
So we put it there for them to, maintain.
Well,
that's just-
now, so we own and maintain the building. CVB contributes a portion of hotel motel to Historic Athens to run the Welcome Center. So think about staffing and power bill and that kind of thing. And then the other key factor here is that the SPLOST investment, not only is a large public investment, we are bound to make that investment unless there was a separate vote to remove it from the referendum. So you certainly would not want to place this property outside the hands of unified government until that was completed. Otherwise, you get into all sorts of gratuities issues and otherwise.
So fraternity, we don't want a fraternity to go there, right?
I mean, world's your oyster. You can do whatever you.
Thing, I can see this property going,
Yeah.
profitable event space. I would.
Yeah, no special use permits allowed.
Yeah.
And that would be, when we get to conditions, those will be the kind of things I'd be interested in understanding. But anyway, so this one is already claimed with our commitment with the 2020 SPLOST that has yet to be completed, but is sitting there ready as needed because the referendum says it has to go to that.
Yes.
And there were prior SPLOST investments, I want to say 2000 or 2005, that were made into the Taylor Grady House. But because they're completed, there's no risk of jeopardizing the referendum, but making next steps to the property.
Any other questions for me on this one?
The next property is the West Broad Service Center located at 300 Henderson Extension. We have no major life cycle replacements at this facility and no major replacement scheduled for the next 5 years. One important operational note is that Athens-Clarke County does not provide landscaping to this facility. As a result, the lease space requires the lowest amount of annual investment from Athens-Clarke County. We are aware that this building was purchased in 1981. There is currently limited documentation explaining the full history of how Athens-Clarke County came to own this property.
Which Andrew named it the West Broad Service Center.
I did, yes.
Just recently.
And just HCD's, Hancock Community Development Corp. is of course the tenant there. I'd seen some clerk's record that they were not the original tenant, so we've had a tenant that was prior to them being in there, but if y'all take a deep dive, I'm expecting we'll learn more about this one. Just
Was
because
it
of
part of the school?
No,
Mm-mm.
it's
Do we know when it was built?
not Westcon, it's,
Did you say 81?
well, we bought it in 81.
But the structure itself, maybe when it was.
I could see what our records show.
looks like cinder block.
It is
Yeah.
under block.
I can't place where,
It's across from the.
Oh, there's the-
Howard Center.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's across from the community center.
Anderson,
Yeah, it's, kind of
bearings of.
across from the basketball court. kind
So the tax records indicate that it was built in 1970. I would wager that's probably an estimate.
Mhm.
But certainly it came with the building when we bought it.
Nice to see that on the list. Since it fit, and that's back to that first chart fits the criteria And I do agree with us tackling the ones that all fit into
That's
that
right.
criteria versus just. Any other questions on this one? We're good. Thanks, James.
All right, the next facility is the East Athens Neighborhood Health Center located at 402 McKinley Drive. Several improvements have already been completed at this facility, including HVAC system upgrade, interior painting as well. And to the tune around $15,000. Looking ahead, we have several future life cycle projects, including door painting, a roof replacement that we've got tentatively in FY 28 to the tune of around $70,000. Carpet replacement, that's around another 16,000. But then in 2030, we have already looked at HVAC replacement right around $12,000. In 2022, Clarke County partnered with the Athens Neighborhood Health Center to construct a building addition exceeding $1 million because of that private investment. The facility now operates under a 20-year lease agreement that includes penalties for ACC Gov if we decide to terminate that lease. This building is a part of the Marion Moore Center, which represents strategic investments in inner East Athens that date back more than 30 years.
And those are some of the criteria, Andrew, that has it to where they're outside of the charge.
Well, so we're showing you these because it technically meets the charge. When we get to the end of this presentation, we will give you some suggestions on properties we would suggest may meet the charge, but you may want to just set aside.
Okay.
This would be one of them, because if you look at that picture, it is actually part of a larger campus. So while the building itself is operated by a single nonprofit, to the west is where you have that shared use building with EADC, Athens Tutorial, and the health department. To the right, you have the dance center that's operated by Leisure Services. It is plausible that you might be able to subdivide this and create a parcel like we were talking about with the others. In general, I would recommend to you that we should not fragment campuses. So where we have a consolidated ownership, it doesn't usually make sense to start carving out pieces. And then similarly, we can bring you the details, but there's functionally it's a renewing lease, but it goes for a maximum of 20 years in renewal terms. And because there was so much money invested by the Neighborhood Health Center to add that building addition, the unified government has a commitment that there would actually be a financial penalty if we failed to execute all of those lease terms. So it would be a very costly endeavor amongst other things.
How many months are left on the lease, or how many years?
I think we'd be looking at about 18 right now.
18 years?
Yeah.
Well,
It shouldn't even be really on the list.
well,
It'd be too expensive to do it.
but
That's right.
for him, for the criteria, that's how it starts, and that's why we had Andrew and these guys studying it to help us with aligning which ones we move on with. And I can tell you from the Board of Health meeting last week, that clinic is busy, and they would be every day of the week if they didn't have 3 vacancies in nurses that would be helping with that. So, I get it, and I do remember all the upgrades and remodeling that we did for these tenants too. Okay, any more questions on this one?
Is there a spot that goes along with that?
I don't know the history of what funds were used to build the buildings and whether or not they existed when we acquired them. I'm not aware of any, there's not a pending SPLOST, if that's your question.
So that makes coming out of the general fund though.
That's right.
But look how much it's changed. I mean, we peaked out.
Well, those peaks are driven by those red items, which are capital reinvestment, and so they're not gonna happen every single year. Like you could go, 30 years before you need a new roof, but if the roof is 250 grand, your budget's gonna notice it.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
So the next facility is the Taylor Grady House located at 694 Prince Avenue. This historic property has undergone recent improvements, including HVAC system upgrades, costing approximately $14,850, as well as interior painting and minor restorations. However, the life cycle identifies several capital investments needed in the coming years. A full HVAC system replacement in FY '27 at approximately $175,906. A roof replacement is expected between FY '28 and FY '30. We're looking at around $80,000. Interior painting and restoration work is projected to cost approximately $141,266 in FY '29. And then we get into things like carpet in FY '30, which is about $13,000. And then an additional building system upgrades right around FY '31, we're looking at about $100,000.
What upgrade is that?
Just general facility upgrades. Right around.
This facility has a, ADA lift in the back. It's like, almost like an open air elevator to some degree. It also has some commercial kitchen type equipment inside of it.
What did you say the number for that was?
100K?
100,000, yes, by FY '31.
And that's, how long is the lease of that phone right now?
It's year to year.
Yes.
In good standing, those, so the last time this property committee, when we met
Right.
before, different composition, for the membership here, it was for the leasing stuff, so that's where we learned a lot about the leasings, and we learned that the leftover kitchen stuff, and didn't we make it to where they couldn't try to put in, or it wasn't suitable to have what would be a full kitchen,
Yeah.
a commercial kitchen to it, and they bring in and put out.
They have what you would call like a catering kitchen, so they have big commercial sinks, warming ovens. I think they even have some dish cleaning stuff. But what they don't have is a vent hood and a cooktop, which are bringing a whole nother level of permitting and building modification. Cause most of their events that they do are done in partnership with a private catering business.
How is that, elevator going?
Up and down.
It's not stuck up or stuck down, James?
Said up and down.
That's exactly how we want it to be.
Historically, this building was purchased and renovated through a partnership between the Junior League and the City of Athens. This is one of the more expensive historic properties that we own. The nonprofit operating this building has recently raised funds for a smaller restoration project. Even with those efforts, life cycle projections, we're looking at more than $500,000 in reinvestment in the upcoming fiscal years.
Have y'all seen the restored kitchen, smokehouse? I guess it's an exterior kitchen building. It's really cool.
Smokehouse, I think.
Well, is it the smokehouse or the original kitchen? I don't know, it's a little exterior brick building. They've restored it to like a really authentic kitchen space.
And there, what James alluded to there, they proposed to do some renovations on the ground floor, which, most recently was actually used as like an apartment for an on-site caretaker. And so they've got a proposal for a larger restroom and some teaching space was kind of what I'd seen last time. And I think also a space recreating almost like, is it slave quarters? Yeah.
They had a, mini version of that at one of our open houses. It was interesting. Okay, any more questions on Taylor Grady House? Thank you, James.
The next facility is Old Fire Hall number 2, located at 489 Prince Avenue. No major life cycle capital replacements have occurred recently. We do have HVAC equipment replacement scheduled for this fiscal year at an estimated cost around $8,000. We do have some projected painting right around $10,000 to $11,000, and then a roof replacement expected in FY '29 at a cost of $58,000, with additional work that might pop up during those things, contingency right around $15,000. Historically, this building was one of the original fire halls serving the city of Athens. The other historic fire hall is now incorporated into the Classic Center complex. Historic Athens has played an important role in preserving the structure and life cycle projections. Show that approximately $90,000 in capital investment will be required in the next couple of years.
Alrighty.
And the final facility is the Cottage Sexual Assault Center located at 3019 Lexington Road. There have been no major life cycle system replacements reported here recently. Looking ahead, we have HVAC equipment replacement on the forefront around 2031 at about $8,000, with interior painting, things like that. This facility is part of the larger Athens-Clarke County Public Safety Campus. The organization operating out of this building is currently operating on a 10-year lease that was originally established in exchange for its investment in the facility improvement. The cottage provides critical service to victims of sexual assault, domestic violence work, and closely work with Athens-Clarke County and the public safety departments to support these services.
So one key thing that really want to take away here, you can see kind of that squiggly blue all over. This is the weirdest parcel in Athens, but it is what I would call our public safety campus. So it's co-located with the jail, police, evidence storage, corrections. There's a lot of benefits to us to having all of these. And again, I would be hesitant to suggest that you start dividing up campuses where they exist. And so that'll actually lead me to next slide. So when we think about the charge, we've shown you kind of all of the properties that would meet the charge. There's some that we would suggest probably, if you wanted to narrow your discussion, you could set aside. The Brumby House, the Athens Welcome Center with its pending SPLOST investment, the fact that it's downtown, it kind of anchors North Avenue coming in. I wouldn't suggest to you that it would be a good time to let go of the Brumby House. And I have not heard anybody in the community suggest that we shouldn't operate a welcome center as a community resource. Certainly could be its own discussion. The East Athens Clinic or the Athens Neighborhood Health Clinic, again, is Commissioner Culpepper mentioned, we still have 18 years with penalties for early terminations. It's part of a much longer standing commitment for investments in their East Athens. And so wouldn't rush to put that one at the top of your list. And then the cottage, similarly, it's part of a campus for public safety, and those services that they provide to victims of crime, I suspect that if the cottage wasn't there and wasn't in our community, you would hear a request from our public safety agencies to have some kind of social worker or employee that is tasked with some of the services they provide that we don't subsidize. So there's some cost savings there. So if you were to kind of think about focusing your conversation, that would leave you on the two properties that share the Taylor Grady sites, the community theater and the Taylor Grady House, historic fire hall too, and then, you know, the West Broad Service Center as being ones that meet the charge and don't have a lot of other known strings attached. I do want to mention the theater. We do have records that it was built by a private developer in Athens, city of Athens, committed that the theater would kind of forever have first opportunity to use it. It doesn't say that they would have exclusive use or that there couldn't be a lease or that there couldn't even be fees associated with it. It just simply said that they basically had a first right of refusal. Now, I think the attorneys would tell you that a government cannot make a perpetual commitment like that. But it's certainly been a commitment that's been in place for a long time. And so that actually kind of leads to these discussion points for you all to think about and discuss. So the first is the charge. What we heard from legal is that there's not really a mechanism to transfer an individual property to a named nonprofit that complies with Georgia law. So the mayor's charge, as you've received it, is probably not viable, and that may be where y'all end this conversation, or you may go back to the mayor and ask if he wants to clarify it. If you move forward, and you don't have to do these things separately, but if you decide to move forward, getting some feedback on which properties you want to prioritize, learning more about. If you move forward, do you envision engaging with those nonprofits? So it may be that you enter into a world where you do want to recommend selling a property, and if that's consistent with the charge. Certainly that would be there, but even if it wasn't, even if we could fully implement the mayor's charge, I suspect you may find these parties don't have the financial wherewithal to take ownership of the property and may be hesitant to do so if they were offered the chance. We've heard some nuggets today. So we talked about the commitment when the community theater was built. We're not really sure how we came to own the West Broad Service Center. If you're gonna get serious about any of this, I would suggest to you that you probably want to do title searches on these properties where we pay a law firm to go research the title history extensively. Those take a while. They can take several months. And so I would suggest that if you're gonna take a deeper dive, it's a worthy investment for us to commission those title searches, because it never hurts to know more about what you own. And then kind of tied a little bit into item 1. Is the committee interested in learning about selling the properties with restrictions embedded in them? Now, again, that doesn't true up with the charge, so. But we talked a little bit about the types of kind of land use restrictions that might be applied. And so what we have on deck for next week, should you want to keep going, is we would have planning come in to talk about zoning and historic preservation, because historic preservation is a key part of that charge as it's written. And so with that, I'm gonna be quiet and listen to y'all.
This is great, the summary sheet, and we'll go around and highlight on this last sheet what we want to go forward with. So next week, we already have penciled in what would be that zoning and historic discussion, right?
We do. It's on deck, should we move forward.
Melissa, you want to go first?
Yeah, so, I mean, there are some complexities wrapped up in most of these properties, but I do have some concerns about the West Broad Service Center property. It's in the middle of a neighborhood where affordable housing providers have been doing some work. What is the feasibility of just offering that to an affordable housing provider, or having our own HCD department work on that as an affordable housing project?
So that could, in my mind, you guys correct me, that could go as a continue to talk about and learning, like number 5, interested in learning more about selling properties with restrictions embedded in it.
Yeah, like,
And so that would be, so you're okay with us if we go ahead with that, we want to look at embedded restrictions.
I mean, that I'm less concerned about embedded restrictions, as long as I mean, I could see that entire property be completely redeveloped. The other ones, not so much. But I could see it being completely redeveloped for affordable housing. It's in the middle of a neighborhood, adjacent to lots of schools and services. It's an ideal location. It's not a historic building. The property really could use to be redeveloped. It's right across from the community center and park.
So
Pool.
So if our next step involved the title searches, we could have the title searches be happening for that, and that could still not we're still not saying where it goes, except it goes to a better use than right now.
Yeah.
Does that fit what you're
Yeah, I
saying?
mean, specifically for affordable housing, I would say. And then the other properties that have, nonprofits, 2 of them long associated with them, I'd love to, reach out to those entities and bring them into this discussion. Because I would hate for us to put these properties out there and have these like, you know, revered nonprofits lose their facilities.
Well, I think, as we learned
If-
earlier, we can't just
Yeah.
pick somebody to come
Well-
to the table, but
I'm less interested in making them available if it's clear that the entities that use them are completely unable to be considered
okay.
to enter the RFP or the bids.
Okay. So how about, let's talk about the ones that are no. Are you clear that at this point of our discussions to not have additional review of Brumby and the East Athens-Clarke and the cottage?
Yeah.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, John, what do you think?
Well, I want to go back to what's the goal? Are we trying to reduce our annual maintenance on these and take stuff out of the general budget because these are costing a lot to maintain?
Well,
They're cumbersome, so
well, that's part of it, but as the mayor's charge was, that wasn't explicit in here, but James is here to share how it is relative. And for us who've been studying the property,
Right.
it also is relevant.
So the ones that are the most expensive to keep up with. So Brumby, there's a spot for that, right? So that's not an issue. And we're recommending not do anything with that anyway, right?
At this point.
The West Broad Service Center, there isn't any maintenance on that. I agree with Melissa about maybe better utilizing that. But are we displacing the Hancock Community Development? I don't know what they do in there. Is there space for them? You know, I don't want to create an uproar in the neighborhood where we're displacing something that neighborhood utilizes. I have no idea if they do. I don't know. Obviously, we don't want to touch the Miriam Moore stuff because of our 18-year commitment. Taylor Grady, you know, that's a big one, which we just spent all this time on this lease, you know, and now we're gonna turn around and try to sell it. You know, if we go to sell it, the people that are in there aren't gonna be able to buy it. Because we gotta go to the highest bidder.
Or auction.
Or auction, but regardless,
Well-
they're not gonna be able to buy these things, so we're displacing these nonprofits. Is there a way to write in the leases, you know, like they have triple net leases, I don't know what they're called, where they're responsible, the leaseor, or leasing, whichever one, is responsible for the maintenance of it. Would that fix the problem that we're trying to solve?
To the degree that the problem is maintenance cost, at least temporarily, yes. So because this has been talked about in the many times that the leasing policy was in front of GOC. You really run one major risk there, which is that the entity, so if you lower the public level of service, we can do that. We can have central services pull off and just say, best of luck to y'all. But you run into two things. One is it your intent to do that to all facilities that are leased or all nonprofit facilities? So for example, are we going to tell the Miriam Moore Center or the health center, or are we get to quasi governments and say that? Because if you don't, you're replicating some of the disparities in leasing that led to us to have a 7-year discussion about leasing anyhow.
Right, that's what.
And then the second thing that's the more likely outcome is they're not gonna have the financial resources to sustain those investments. They're going to use the facility till it's somewhat a carcass of itself. And then they're going to either appeal to the government to make those investments at a time that they're more expensive because they've been deferred and things have compounded, or they're gonna walk. Now, if they walk, you get back to this discussion of, well, is this the time that we wanna stop leasing it and just sell it? But several of the properties we've discussed have significant historic value. You risk kind of almost a demolition by neglect if that situation goes too long. So those are the reasons why we, in the leasing discussion, have not recommended placing maintenance on the responsibility of the tenants. But As I understand it, legally, we could do so. I think our recommendation would be that it be fairly uniform in whatever version it's applied.
Yeah, so
We should confused about what we're trying. Do we want to sell these buildings or not? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
that's, well, I think we should. I think that the public service of them, in my opinion, is minimal in respect to the amount of time and effort that our staff places on them. Especially when we're talking about space allocation study and the judicial center that we're trying to do, those are the functions of us more so than these. But I would like us to, on the group discussion points, give some clarity for what staff do so that we can learn. So for number one, how's the group want to handle the charge? How about if I go as the chair, meet with the mayor, let him know legally it has to be reworked? And boy, if I had a draft of a legal version of of what he said, that would help me. Sure. If you could send me his draft. So how would we be able to paraphrase this charge in a legal form for getting rid of property?
Okay, I can work on something.
Something like that.
Sure.
If you, email that to me and maybe text me that you've emailed it to me, so I don't, it's not lost in my head.
I can.
And then I'll meet with Kelly and ask him, because if he pulls it,
Yeah,
or if he can give some clarity there, but in the meantime, what do you guys think about staff going ahead and doing the title searches and get that underway? And then, teach us more, not the next time we're gonna look at zoning and what would potentially be the appropriate zone for these versus government, so that we don't end up with what was happening at the Board of Regents property, one was that, where it's not pre-zoned.
mhm. So, I
And
mean,
so then we would learn how those, potential restrictions can be embedded in there so that it's fair and reasonable, not so narrow.
if we're asking the mayor for clarity, then what if he pulls it? We don't need to be doing all this title search and all that stuff. Does that make sense? I don't want to waste a bunch,
Yeah.
everybody's time if this is not, if it's not what he, does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Well, I think he, in my opinion, I think he probably didn't realize that there was a state at the higher level of it being.
Saying that we can't sell it.
And if I showed him a version of it, that how we could move ahead, but he also wants a mechanism to return the properties to our ownership in the event that they fold. So,
I mean, I'm looking at the lion's share of the annual costs is landscape maintenance. I feel like that is like one thing we can do, and especially considering that, you know, these properties we've narrowed it down to all have some kind of, you know, public event kind, I mean, they wanna look good. You know, Taylor Grady House is not gonna let the grass get too high.
But it's-
if they're gonna
but they're-
have weddings and stuff there. I'm also, the fire college shows, you know, a couple $1,000 in landscaping, they don't have a.
That's tree planting and maintenance in the right of way.
yeah,
Oh, it's the right,
Starts watching the brick.
so we'd be doing that anyway.
yeah.
We would do that no matter
Okay,
what.
so that kind of is
But
Xed out. So this is
it's also the upcoming
the upcoming
stuff that's
improvements,
happening.
yeah.
that's there.
I mean, that building I could see unloading with, you know, facade easements and all that. It is a very small building. And I know Historic Athens actually needs more space these days than what that building provides. I mean, but with these historic properties, I am reluctant to unload them because it does kind of leave their future uncertain, and I do believe that the public accessibility provides a really great public educational service that this local government really can't provide. You know, they're doing a great job at the Taylor Grady House with those interpretive spaces.
Yeah, but they all,
And their public events, they have, I mean, there was one just the other day, they are regularly allowing general public to come and hang out and enjoy the space, and
Well, I can tell you when we were talking about the leasing, version of the new lease for Taylor Gravy, that they were interested in being more separate, the two entities, the town and gown and the sharing the property sort of event, where that would solve a lot of issues there if it were to be divided
Yeah,
officially.
I mean, I definitely see that as, a viable solution. And I mean, I've been saying from the beginning, I would love to see us just offer to somehow get town and gown to buy the space. Maybe we maintain the ground lease so it isn't redeveloped in the future.
So now we're back to what we're
It's-
talking about here. This is our opportunity to have to put that kind of package together.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
So-
a case by case basis.
Well,
Here.
but as a committee, and the way we have to work as a committee, and as we've learned, we can't pick a special circumstance for one group or another group, which is why if we informally talk or get asked about this, we can share what we're learning about. But I really don't think that we have enough information for number 3, engaging with the current leasing. Andrew, do you have some ideas that would maybe help us?
Well,
Did that?
I think what I hear, some of this discussion of what problem are we trying to solve here and is the charge compatible? It'd be really helpful to have clarity from the mayor and this committee on those things before you bring in a nonprofit. Because I would think if you wanted to hear from the nonprofit, it would be most productive if we actually share with them ahead of time questions you were hoping to hear from them. Some of them do have history on these buildings. So I know that historic Athens, in its precursor form, was very instrumental in kind of preserving Fire Hall 2. And I think as a partnership on that, then they were allowed to lease it. Similarly, we talked about the Town and Gown Theater. We know that the Junior League had done similar preservation efforts when they had occupied Taylor Grady. These are things that I know they would want you to know. But to just bring them in, like, hey, we've got this charge and we want to hear what you have to say, you may find those conversations to not be as productive until you kind of know the direction you want to go.
Yeah, so I was thinking we would hold off on 3 as we continue to study. Get some clarity from the mayor, which is, that would be me taking the number 1 part and talking to the mayor with Courtney's help with the draft version of it. And then the committee moving forward, which ones do we want to prioritize? John, do you also agree with the chart before? You want to put up this chart? Sitting. The Athens, the town of Gown, as I know it, the 4 that were on the chart, 6 from the end.
Previous slide.
One more back. Yeah, right here. Do you, John, do you also agree with this number for additional study?
That's fine.
Those yeses?
I agree, but I think we need to be clear on what our goals are.
Okay.
Because if we're spending a bunch of time on something that's really not costing us a bunch of money, we're wasting our time. Does that make? Or what?
But if we came out of committee and said, hey, this West Broad Service Center probably could, we would be able to learn how that went in the land bank or something, the affordable housing fund or something. We could help guide it, not in one direction if the other 3 are another. Again, I think there's more to learn without it wasting staff's time. I hope, and Andrew, you'll tell me as well. So if we have an agreement to move forward, it would be which properties, and I think the 4 yeses here, we're in agreement, right? Do we need to make a motion on that? Dennis,
Yeah, I'm with those.
you want to make a motion?
I'm trying to, so the 4 properties,
That have a yes on it, that we also agree we're going to continue to study about.
yeah, I'm interested in
Okay.
continuing to study.
Okay, I need a motion.
Can I encourage you to make that motion for the 3 that you don't want to have part of future discussions?
So we don't bring them back in.
Right, because to say, well, we want to focus on these four, it's 6 of one, half
You
dozen.
like
of
it
the
the
other.
other way around. You want the.
It's easier for us to go, because I'm thinking about one day I have to write a committee report. And so it's easy enough to say that on 4/20, the committee met, and after consideration, they just determined that they did not want to have further discussion about the Brumby House, the health clinic, and, right, and so.
So the theater is listed here as Athens Community Theater. I think that's incorrect.
Well, so it's actually shown as both. I had the same thing, because Athens Community Theater officially is the publicly operated theater that we have embedded in Memorial Park.
Yeah.
But in a number of records, it still says that this was the original, the OG Athens Community Theater by title. And I think everybody just informally calls it Town and Gown Theater. But I think even their banner on their building, I believe, says Athens Community
I
Theater.
saw that, the picture James had, it had it there. So can we have a motion that captures it in the way that Andrew likes to do his committee report?
Second.
Motion by Andrew.
Andrew, like,
You want to do the motion, John, for what he's.
that we're going to, not look at the cottage, East Athens, East Athens Clinic or Brumby House. Those are not for consideration in this,
Yeah,
this committee.
Melissa, you want a second?
I'll second.
All right, all in favor? Aye, unanimous. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and then if we want, do you think, just to keep people from thinking that we're talking about what's at the Memorial Park, should we have /town and gown for our future discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I
Just
just,
to keep it from being confused.
well, yeah, I think so.
So y'all both think that clarification.
We can do that in another motion.
Okay, so okay, I'm gonna talk with Kelly, see how this works with that. I will alert, through the official channels if something I learned from there means that we fold up, or I don't know. We'll just see what would come out of that. And we know which ones we want to move forward with. And do we need a motion, or should I just consult with, Andrew, who is the manager's office has assigned us to? Can we just meet with him to know if the title searches should happen? If Kelly says we should keep going?
I don't wanna do a bunch of stuff we know we're not gonna sell those
Okay.
buildings. I mean, if in the back of our mind, we're not gonna sell Taylor Grady, that's a lot of work, I think, that y'all gonna have to hire an attorney to do all that, right?
Yeah.
And what will the title search bring up? I mean, I think we have to do it before closing, but I don't wanna waste anybody's
Oh,
time.
we definitely want to do it even before. So if there's a way to transfer, if we were going to sell, you would want to do the title search ahead of time. So it would find things like if there's any prior easements, if there's any title issues. So for some reason, the property had been consolidated from multiple parcels and it was unclear whether or not we'd actually received ownership of one of those parcels.
So we did need to do that first.
I think there's still on that. That Henderson
And-
extension.
Usually title searches run somewhere in the range of $600 to $1,000. I would suggest to you, given how long they take for 4 properties, it's gonna
Okay,
be money well spent.
I thought it'd be more than that.
Okay.
Yeah,
So shall we have a motion for the title work to begin on the 4 yeses?
based on your conversation, what you hear from the mayor.
Okay. Well, so we're meeting next week. It's the early, I told you I'd pick you up. But it's the 10 o'clock meeting. Are we still good? Because,
The 28th.
we can still learn about the zoning and historic preservation details. And I'll make sure I've talked to the mayor before then. So then we can, if the agenda's inclusive, Andrew, then we can talk about the title searches. And,
Why don't I, because we're only a week away, at the next meeting, I'll bring back information on the cost and timeline to do the title searches. And then I'll make space in the agenda for the chair to talk about whatever the conversation is with the mayor on the charge.
okay. All right. And plus, this gives us time too. We got a week to process what all we've learned. And then we're gonna learn more as far as zoning and that sort of thing. Cause I don't want the community to think that we're putting things up for sale that have a G on it versus, but now that
We would
it's a
have to
land use.
We have to read that, yeah.
Yeah, we'd have to rezone it, but what I'm saying, we now have the future land use approved and we can learn And we'll have planning staff in here to help us know what would be the appropriate thing to put on it, which, Melissa, I'm not sure how much of that's gonna cover some of the other things too, under the property with restrictions embedded. Okay, so it sounds like most of the homework is gonna be zoning and the historic preservation for next week, except for Courtney has a short.
But I will text you about when I send.
Yes. Or if it's short of you, just text it.
By the word.
You are. Yeah, okay.
What about the vacant property that the county has? We're not talking about any of that. We're just
Yes.
these,
I want that to come to our committee soon.
because that's what I really thought we were talking about was
Yeah.
disposing of property we're not using, vacant land and stuff like that.
So that's a much easier conversation because you're not trying to land it to somebody. You also have recently voted on a land bank that can help to leverage some of those properties for affordable housing. So, Chair, if your conversation with the mayor, he's willing to extend the charge to that, we'd be happy to bring information.
Let me cover that when I talk to him.
Yeah.
Because if he thinks that, I mean, just like you're saying, we're starting off with the most complicated.
Right, that's what I'm wondering.
And then-
Would it be easier to pivot and do that first, if that's easier? Because that's a bigger piece, and it's something that's gonna have a bigger impact on the community, whether it's affordable housing or selling it to private entity where it goes on our tax package. This stuff is not gonna have as big of an impact, financially.
That's right.
Well, the maintenance.
Now,
Right.
I'll go ahead and pull back the curtain. When you think about vacant property, there's two, what I would call high value properties that have come up. So one is the ownership near the health department. There's the surface lots kind of across the street from the health department. And then the other is the Creekwood duplexes, which you all have a pending action to actually put home investments in, renovate as affordable housing and sell. Beyond that, I think there's a total of about 6 other properties that we've identified as being some use for housing. And then there's a bunch of junk. And then we probably just need to figure out a way to get the junk off our books, quite honestly. And we did adopt an ordinance that allows us to do, and that's consistent with state law, it's small and remnant parcels. So if the county owns a small sliver behind my property, it's not usable for anything, we do have the legal right to sell it directly to that property owner.
Without a realtor.
We've done one of those.
Without going to the bin or.
Yeah. So, but I think it would be helpful for commissioners, because this is a topic that comes up quite often, to take that landscape view and very quickly parse out, well, this much is park and this much is greenway and these are county facilities, and you start peeling back the layers of the onion until you get through that noise and really get to properties that could be used elsewhere.
We've had a list at one point. Recently got one. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago when we were first discussing land bank, I think. We found a long list and it showed the junk and the scant handful of viable properties.
Well, and I just had one that, in my career, we had been holding as a buffer to the airport. But in recent conversations with the airport, they said, I don't know, we want to double check whether or not we need that buffer. Well, if they decide no, well, those are good candidates for housing. So that would be a welcome addition to the charge. I think it's probably a separate charge
Yeah.
rather than a.
Well, so I've got that also on my notes so that I can let Kelly know that we stand ready to work. We're not trying to not work, but, see how he wants to handle the latest on his charge.
I mean, I can see why this charge was put at the top, because staff goes through a lot of crap with these leases and maintenance, and if we can whittle that down, and get that situated sooner rather than later, it would relieve a lot of burden. I can see why, and the sooner that, the entities that are involved in them know. And I mean, it's been an issue that's dragged on for what, 7 or 8 years now, and maybe we should get it settled.
Well, I think also the reality that we can't do a lease purchase and we can't help a tenant become owners like we want in the
Yeah, we
housing world.
we can't just offer it to a specific
Yeah,
buyer.
yeah, exactly,
So,
because since we can't do that and Kelly learning that, I think will be very informative.
Like pivot, you know.
And I mean, there were times when we were working on the leasing for Taylor Brady that we wondered and felt like some of the interested parties maybe would want to buy it. But I think it'd be inappropriate for us to be chatting about other things until we know what we are supposed to be doing and feasibility of it. Okay, we are coming to the end of the meeting as far as what we have on here. Does everybody feel good about what we've covered so far?
So it's next Tuesday or
Next Tuesday.
Tuesday at 10.
Okay, so now I'm looking for the final motion of the day.
Motion to adjourn.
Yes,
Second.
yes, all in favor? Yes.
All right.
Yay.
Andrew,
Good
I've
job.
got to find there's a tract of land that somebody texted me about that I'm trying to. It's on the east side. He owns the land around him.